It started innocently enough. I was just browsing online late one night, the kind of mindless scrolling you do when you can't sleep, when I came across something odd. I've always been curious about the darker side of the internet. Call it a morbid curiosity or just the allure of the unknown. A friend of mine, who I'll call Jason, had once mentioned something about the dark web, telling me it was a place where anything could be bought, sold, or found, often things that shouldn't exist. Naturally, I brushed it off as some exaggerated rumor, but curiosity always gets the best of me. On this particular night, I found myself stumbling across a forum claiming to give access to exclusive content for a price. I didn't think much of it at first. A couple of clicks, a few random links, and I found myself on a site I couldn't even properly describe. A web page filled with black backgrounds and cryptic messages flashing across the screen. Something about it seemed off, but I figured it was just another strange corner of the internet. I didn't think I was doing anything illegal, just exploring. I followed the directions on the site, downloaded a small program, and within minutes I was in. I felt like I'd crossed some sort of threshold, into a place I wasn't meant to be. It was silent, eerie even. I could feel the weight of my own hesitation as I clicked through pages filled with disturbing images, videos, and cryptic threads. Yet nothing seemed too shocking to me, not yet. It wasn't until I clicked on a thread titled, "Your Every Move," that things started to take a darker turn. The title alone gave me pause, but the strange pull of curiosity kept me going. The post had a single line of text that read, "We know you." Under it, there was a short video with a timestamp, one that I didn't recognize. Without thinking, I clicked play. The screen flickered for a moment before showing a grainy image of my bedroom. I froze. It was a camera angle from the corner of my room, just behind the door. The lighting was dim, just like the way my room looked at that time of night. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself that this was some elaborate prank or a deep fake. But no, this was my room, my bed, my stuff. The video didn't show me moving. It wasn't even clear if it was live. But the fact that someone, somewhere, had managed to capture an image of my room in such detail made my skin crawl. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of it. As the video continued, the text appeared again, flashing on the screen in bold letters. "We've been watching you." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt my breath grow shallow. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could this be? There was no way someone had access to my room. I hadn't given out any personal details. But there it was, a video of my own space. The thought of someone being able to see me, to be watching me in real time, twisted my stomach into knots. Then another message popped up. "We know what you're thinking right now. We know you're afraid." I recoiled from the screen, feeling a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I closed the browser window immediately, but it didn't feel like enough. Something told me this was far from over. As I sat there in the dark, my mind whirling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I had crossed a line into something far more dangerous than I could understand. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but deep down I knew it wasn't. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I was being watched. Every time I sat down at my computer, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the unease remained, gnawing at the back of my mind. Then it started. The first message came through my phone late one night. It was a text from an unknown number, one I didn't recognize. "You went to the dark web, didn't you?" My stomach dropped. I froze, staring at the screen, feeling my heart race in my chest. How did they know? I hadn't told anyone about it, not even Jason. I was completely alone in this. The thought of someone having access to my personal information was terrifying. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I locked my phone and shoved it in my drawer, as if somehow that would make everything go away. But the message lingered in my mind. The next day, more messages came. They were brief, cryptic, and unsettling. "We saw what you did last night. We know you're scared." The texts kept coming, growing more and more specific. The messages seemed to know things about me, little details about my life that I hadn't shared with anyone. At first, it was small stuff, like the color of my jacket or the book I had been reading the night before. Then it got stranger. The messages started mentioning things I hadn't told anyone, like how I'd been to the gym earlier that day and the coffee shop I visited on my lunch break. It was as if they were following me, tracking my every movement. The worst part? There was no way for anyone to be in my life like this. I hadn't shared any of these details with anyone online, and my phone was locked down tight. I wasn't the type to post my location or updates on social media, so how could they know? But the texts didn't stop. They continued, each one more unnerving than the last. You think you can hide from us? We know where you are right now. We see you, even when you think you're alone. My hands shook as I read the messages. I started to feel paranoid. Every time I left my house, I felt as though I was being watched. I couldn't go anywhere without looking over my shoulder. The fear consumed me, making it hard to focus on anything else. I even found myself checking the locks on my door multiple times a day, though I knew they were secure. But that didn't stop the creeping dread. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when the screen suddenly went black. I tried to turn it on again, but it wouldn't respond. In a panic, I grabbed my laptop to see if I could figure out what happened. But when I opened it up, the screen was filled with a single line of text. "We've been watching you for days. You can't escape." The words felt like a punch to the gut, and I slammed the laptop shut. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. How had they gotten into my devices? I couldn't even trust my own technology anymore. Desperation began to set in. I tried to reach out to a few people, but I didn't want to sound insane. No one would believe me. I didn't even know how to explain what was happening. The rational part of me screamed that this couldn't be real, that it was just a series of coincidences. But the creeping fear told me otherwise. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone out there was watching me, and they knew everything. I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I visited the dark web and now someone was tracking my every move? They'd think I was crazy. No one would understand. Then another message came. "You're not safe anywhere. The walls have ears." It felt like a warning, a final note to remind me that there was no place I could hide. I wasn't sure who was behind it or how they were doing it, but one thing was clear. I had become their target. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, and there was no way out. In the darkness of my apartment, I couldn't help but wonder how much they truly knew. Could they be inside my house right now, watching me from the shadows? The idea that someone was so close to my every move, was enough to drive me mad. The messages kept coming, each one more chilling than the last. Whoever they weren't going to stop until I understood just how much control they had over my life. And I was beginning to realize that I might not have the strength to fight back. By now, the messages had become a constant presence in my life, and the fear that had started as a faint buzz in the back of my mind had now taken over completely. I couldn't go a single day without feeling like I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, every time I looked into the mirror, I was reminded that someone knew things about me, things I hadn't shared with anyone. The messages started to escalate, shifting from unsettling observations to outright threats. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk working, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the same unknown number. This time, it wasn't just a message. It was a picture, a grainy, blurry photo. I hesitated for a long time before I finally opened it. When the image loaded, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of my front door, taken from the street. My door was locked, as always. But the idea that someone had taken this picture while standing right outside my house made me feel exposed in a way I hadn't felt before. My first instinct was to check the locks and windows again, but I knew that wouldn't help. I had no idea where the person who was watching me was, and that was the worst part. It could be anyone. They could be standing across the street, in the shadows, or even in the room next to mine, hidden away where I couldn't see them. I tried calling a few people, friends, family, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what was really going on. No one would believe me, and even if they did, what could they do? I was stuck in a nightmare with no way out. I even considered shutting everything down, wiping my devices clean, deleting my accounts. But what good would it do? Whoever this person was, they already had their claws in me. They knew where I lived, what I liked, what I did. They could track my every move. The texts came every few hours, always more specific. They were watching me, even when I thought I was alone. Sometimes I'd go into my kitchen, open the fridge, and find a message waiting for me when I returned to my desk. Other times I'd look down at my phone and see a message that had come through while I'd been standing in the shower or just finishing up a workout. It felt like they were following me in real time, tracking my every movement. We know when you wake up. We know when you leave the house. The messages were starting to bleed into my everyday life. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't escape the feeling that someone, something was always there, lurking just out of sight. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was reality. One night, the situation grew even more sinister. I had been out for a while, just walking around, trying to get some air and clear my head. I hadn't received a message in a couple of hours, and for the briefest moment, I thought maybe it was finally over. Maybe I could start to breathe again. But when I returned to my apartment, the door was slightly ajar. Just a crack, barely noticeable, but enough to make my heart drop to my stomach. I froze, staring at the door. It wasn't like I had forgotten to lock it. I'm always careful. No one else had a key. I was alone in the building, and yet there it was, a small opening, just wide enough to make me feel like something had been tampered with. I stood there for a long moment, debating whether or not to open the door. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, to get away before whatever was waiting inside had the chance to make its move. But I couldn't. My curiosity, my fear, held me in place. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing as the creak of the hinges filled the silence. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the soft glow of the street lamps outside. I stepped inside cautiously, my eyes darting around the room, scanning for any signs of movement. Everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place, but the unease didn't go away. The feeling of being watched intensified. I moved toward my desk, where I'd left my laptop open. It was still there, sitting in the same spot I had left it. But when I glanced at the screen, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The cursor was moving. It was subtle at first, just a small twitch. But as I watched in horror, the cursor moved across the screen, clicking through tabs, opening new windows, as though someone or something was controlling it from afar. I felt the panic rise in my chest. How was this possible? My laptop was closed. I hadn't even been near it since I left the apartment. And yet there it was. Someone was inside my computer, navigating it like they knew exactly what they were doing. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. I had to be imagining things. But when I opened it again, I saw the same message from earlier, the one that had haunted me since it first appeared. "We see you." That's when it hit me. Whoever was behind all of this, whoever had been watching me, they were inside my life. They weren't just following me online. They weren't just sending me messages. They were in my home. They were in my devices. They had crossed the line, and now I was trapped in their web. The horror had gone beyond just a few creepy messages or strange photos. It was personal now. They had infiltrated my life in ways I couldn't even comprehend, and I had no idea how to stop them. As I sat there in the dim light, a horrible thought crossed my mind. What if they had been watching me all along? What if they knew everything about me, every secret, every fear, and now they were going to make me pay for it? I barely slept that night. I sat in front of my laptop, my mind spinning, trying to piece together how this nightmare had escalated so quickly. Whoever this was, they weren't just a faceless person on the other end of the internet. They were inside my life, controlling my devices, watching my every move. I felt powerless, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. The next morning, I tried to regain some sense of control. I turned off all my devices one by one, and even considered going as far as to move to a different place. But that thought was almost laughable. They knew where I lived. They could find me anywhere. I wasn't safe anywhere. But then, as the sun began to set and the dark shadows of night crept into my apartment, something strange happened. The messages stopped. For hours, there was nothing. No texts, no strange photos, no cryptic threats. It was as if the person, or whatever it was, had vanished. I couldn't help but wonder if I had finally scared them off, if my decision to close all my devices had somehow given me a temporary reprieve. Maybe they had grown bored of me or had moved on to someone else. But just as I allowed myself to believe I had a moment of peace, my phone buzzed. I hesitated before unlocking it. My pulse quickened as I looked at the screen. It wasn't a text, it was a notification from an app I didn't recognize. New message, it read. Without thinking, I clicked on it. A video began to play, the screen flashing for a moment before the image became clear. It was a shaky camera, moving erratically, as though the person filming was in a hurry. The scene was blurry at first, but soon it came into focus. I almost dropped my phone. It was a video of my apartment building, shot from across the street. I could see the front of the building, the trees that lined the sidewalk, the cars parked in front. But what made my blood freeze was what I saw next. My apartment window. The camera zoomed in on it, and I could clearly see my silhouette moving around inside, pacing back and forth. It was me. It was my reflection in the window. But no one was outside. No one was filming from across the street. I froze, staring at the video, my heart hammering in my chest. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized the horrifying truth. They were inside my apartment. They had to be. I ran to the door, checked the locks again, though I already knew they were secure. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. Should I call the police? Would they believe me? Would they even be able to help? I felt trapped, isolated, as though the walls of my apartment were closing in on me. And then, in the silence of the room, a new notification appeared on my phone. Look behind you. I turned around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the empty, dimly lit room behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and my fingers trembled as I clutched the phone in my hand. I turned back to the screen, trying to make sense of the video I had just seen. But then the text appeared again. We know you're scared. The words felt like they were branded onto my mind. It wasn't just a simple threat anymore. It was a warning. I felt like I was being toyed with, played like a sick game. Whoever was doing this had all the control. They knew how to manipulate me, how to make me question my every move. The horror I was feeling wasn't just because of the physical danger. It was because of the mind games. The constant feeling of being watched, of never being truly alone. I snapped. I grabbed my phone and typed back a response. Who are you? What do you want from me? I knew it wouldn't matter, but I needed to know. Needed some shred of understanding in the midst of the terror that had consumed me. I hit send, my finger hovering over the screen for a long moment, as if hoping for something that could pull me back from the edge. But the response came quickly. You know who we are. The words chilled me to the core. There was no name, no sign of who or what this was. Just a cryptic message, a final push that made me realize how deep I had fallen into this nightmare. They weren't going to stop. Whoever this was, they were relentless. I spent the rest of the night in a haze of fear, moving between my apartment and my devices, checking everything, looking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise. I didn't know what else to do, but I couldn't sit idly by and wait for whatever this was to get worse. And then, at the brink of dawn, my phone buzzed again. This time the message was different. You want to know who we are? We're the ones who've been following you, the ones you've been trying to hide from, the ones who will never leave you. I was done. This had gone too far. But I realized something in that moment. I wasn't just afraid of what they could do to me. I was afraid that I would never be able to escape them, that this was my life now. I could never go back to normal. I had to end this. I didn't know how or if it was even possible, but I had to try. The days that followed felt like a blur, an endless spiral of paranoia and dread. My phone was always in my hand, my eyes darting from the screen to the shadows around me, as if expecting them to spring to life at any moment. I couldn't trust my own thoughts anymore. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, like I was the prey in a game I couldn't win. I tried everything. I disconnected my internet, wiped my devices clean, changed passwords, and even tried a hard reset on my phone. I thought about going to the police, but what could I tell them? that someone from the dark web had been tracking me, that they knew my every move, my every thought. The whole situation was too absurd, too terrifying for anyone to believe. One night, after an exhausting and restless day of trying to block out the constant feeling of being watched, I sat in front of my laptop. I stared at the blank screen for what felt like hours. How had I gotten to this point? How had this faceless stranger from the dark web gained so much control over my life? I was on the edge, teetering between exhaustion and madness, when I saw it, a new message. It came through my email this time. The subject line was simple, yet its simplicity made my heart race. It's time. I clicked it open with trembling hands. The body of the email was a single line of text. You wanted to know who we are. Now you'll see. Before I could even process what I had read, the screen flickered. The familiar sensation of cold dread crawled down my spine as my webcam light blinked on. I jumped back, heart pounding, my hands shaking as I tried to close the laptop. But the screen didn't go dark. Instead, the image of my living room appeared, through my own webcam. The camera was showing me in real time, as if someone was watching me from within my apartment. It was them. They had access to my webcam. They were inside my world. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 3:13 a.m. I knew then that they were toying with me, stalking me at my most vulnerable. I was helpless, paralyzed by the feeling that my every move was being scrutinized. Then another message popped up on my phone, just as I was about to call for help. It was from the same unknown number. Do you want to see us? It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. The implication was clear. They were no longer hiding. They wanted me to face the truth, to confront them head on. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I thought about packing my things and running, leaving everything behind. But the feeling of their presence, always lurking, always close, had become too much. I needed answers. I needed to know who was behind this madness. So I responded, "Yes, show me." The phone went silent, and for a long minute, I sat there, heart racing, waiting for something, anything to happen. The room was so still, the air so thick with tension, that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. And then the screen went black. I sat frozen, staring at the blank phone screen, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on me. And that's when it happened. The lights in my apartment flickered, the air turning frigid. My breath came out in visible puffs. A low hum, like the static of a broken radio, filled the room. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was wrong. The lights flickered again, and suddenly the TV turned on by itself, showing nothing but static. It was like a signal from another world, a signal that I was no longer in control. A dark figure appeared on the screen, moving slowly. I froze. I had no idea how they were doing this, but I knew one thing. This was it. This was no longer a game. The figure on the screen started to move closer to the camera, its face twisted and obscured by shadows. But then for a split second I saw it, just a flash, a glimpse of a face, my own face. It was me, but not the version of me I knew. This was something else. The eyes were hollow, the expression warped and malevolent. It wasn't me, or was it? I could feel the cold creeping into my bones as I realized what was happening. This was the moment they had been leading me to. They wanted me to see the real me, the person who had been pulled into their dark web. But that wasn't the worst part. As the figure's face grew clearer, the room temperature dropped even further. A chill wrapped around me like a suffocating vice. My phone buzzed, a new message arriving. "Welcome to the end." I didn't know what else to do. The fear, the isolation, the hopelessness all hit me at once. I grabbed my phone, and just as I was about to dial 911, a loud crash echoed through the apartment. My door, the front door, was kicked open. In a panic, I dropped my phone, running toward the door to find it wide open, the hallway outside completely empty. My mind raced as I realized that the threat wasn't over. It was here. I backed away from the door, the sound of footsteps growing closer. They were in the building. They were coming for me. I tried to run, but my legs were frozen in place. My vision blurred, and I stumbled back into my apartment, closing the door behind me and locking it, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The intruder, the watcher, was inside my world. Suddenly I understood something. The messages, the images, the videos, they weren't just about tracking me. They weren't just about fear. They were about control, about turning me into a puppet, dancing on the strings of someone's twisted game. As I crouched in the corner of my apartment, waiting for the inevitable, the realization set in. There was no escape. I was trapped. And whoever had been watching me from the dark web, whoever had been in my life all along, was the last thing I would ever see. The footsteps reached my door, and then everything went dark.